Hi again. It's Sherry again, and I'm here tonight. And tonight's topic is for me. I'm not understanding what this whole like uh, thing about the autism is, and it's an upsetting topic for me because, as far as I know, I have never been diagnosed or whatever it is that they do with autism, but it comes up in my life. Somebody the other day, was actually a few weeks ago, they said to me, "Is it true that people who have autism don't lie?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. Why don't you look it up?" And then they'll make these comments about you take everything so literally. Well, okay, that's because sometimes it is literal. And um, also, one other thing before I start on an actual definition of what is autism. Um, my doctor never told me I had it. Nobody I know had told me I had it. But um, I did read several comments in 2015 that said, if your child is autistic, don't send them to the United States to be tortured. And that's a really disturbing thing to read. And I think it might have been disseminated by some people who either have autism or are in a community in the UK that feels strongly about not uh, manipulating an autistic person to do what you want them to do or to train them not to fight back. And so now I'm going to actually go into the real definition of what is what is autism, and there's some things I know already. One of them is that autism manifests differently in males than it does females. And my sister is an educator in Colorado, and she said that they have two special autistic schools that she's somehow involved with. And she said, I said, "Well, do you think I have autism?" And she said, "No, you do not." And so she is an educator and she has a master's degree and she's worked in the field of education for a long time. And she has told me a couple of times when I asked her, "Well, do you think that I have autism?" And she said, "No, you do not." So I trust that opinion because she has a master's degree or a PhD, I can't remember. And she also has been in administration of public schools for a very long time. Some of the most stressful public schools in the United States due to a push for people to make good grades and the fact that they've had a lot of gun violence in those districts. And she works side by side with people who were injured and witnessed Columbine. And I don't want to bring her name up because I'm sure she's probably a target herself, but she's also a very vocal, strong-willed individual who uh, who is a lot like me, except for one thing, which is she will stay in a stressful situation that hurts her, I think, longer than I will. So, well, because that's what you're supposed to do. And she's an oldest child. So that makes her, that there's always this certain personality type. And I tend to be really like drawn to the oldest children as friends. I've noticed almost all my life that my best friends have been oldest children, except people I was in a relationship with were not oldest children. So there's something there. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just Google at this, you can consider this a tutorial as well on how can I, you look up information that you need without asking me. The answer is you can Google it. And even I make mistakes about what is it Googling something, because my computer science teacher at the University of Arkansas in Fort Smith asked us a question on a test, and it says, is Google a verb? And well, okay, I said yes, it is. And I got the question wrong, and it was the only question on the test that I got wrong. But she said, no, it is not. And she is a computer science teacher. So even I make mistakes. Okay, I'm going to look up, I guess, okay, now for me, when I look up something like, I don't know if it's a disease, a shortcoming, or a opportunity for other people, but I'm going to just go right to the, I'm going to go right to the DSM-5 because why not? I mean, I could just get someone's opinion on what it is, which would be just Googling the word, but I'm not going to do that. Oh, I may have to buy the DSM-5. I think you can still look stuff up on it. Advocacy and, let's see, the Manual of Mental Disorders. So apparently autism is a mental disorder. So, well, that comes from, I think, from the DSM-5, because I think they can, they have, the definitive manual. It's not the Merck veterinary manual. And I also asked my doctor one time, do you think I have Asperger's? And he said, do you mean autism? And I said, I don't know. And then I don't remember the rest of the conversation. Okay, DSM-5 diagnostic criteria. What is autism? Autism speaks. So here we go. Criteria. Okay, here we go. Autism speaks. And then they've got some, oh, I can actually tweet this. So I'm going to read it, but I'm going to tweet it too, just so that the people who always want to, filter things through me for whatever reason, and they can just read it, or they can listen after I post the video, because this isn't a live, this is a pre-recorded live broadcast. Sort of. It's not really a broadcast because it's going to be on an unlisted YouTube channel, and it's going to be posted to a locked private Twitter account. So here we go. DSM-5 diagnostic criteria. Autism Speaks is pleased to provide the full text of the diagnostic criteria. And please keep in mind that if you're not a physician, you can't diagnose people. Okay, I'm going to start over. Autism Speaks is pleased to provide the full text of the diagnostic criteria for autism disorder, autism spectrum disorder, ASD, and related diagnosis of social communication disorder as they appear in the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So clearly autism, according to the DSM-5, is a mental disorder. As of May 2013, psychologists and psychiatrists will be using these criteria when evaluating individuals for these developmental disorders. Okay, now, developmental disorder. That one, okay, guilty as charged. I did have a developmental disorder when I was young, meaning it was very difficult for me to learn how to read because I have dyslexia. And I was in a sort of a gifted program and a learning disabled program simultaneously. But, it's hard for me to see things the way people who don't have dyslexia see things. And sometimes I'm glad about that. It gives me sort of a different perspective that I don't always enjoy, but sometimes I do. Oops, having a problem even scrolling down. So, persistent difficulties in the social use of verbal and nonverbal communication is manifested by the following. Now, here's where, in my opinion, females with autism would differ from males. And you can look into that on your own, but I've read that females who have autism do not have as much of a problem communicating. deficits in using communication for social purposes, such as greeting and sharing information in a manner that is appropriate for social context. Well, sue me if I'm being inappropriate. Impairment of the ability to change communication to match context of the needs of the listener. Well, guess what? I don't give a shit about your needs, because if you're listening to this and I'm not following you on Twitter or giving you a link to my video, then you shouldn't even be listening to it. So I don't think that's inappropriate. If I post this video for people who I am following on Twitter or I give a link to, then they have all of my permission to listen to it. Difficulty following rules for conversation and storytelling. I'm telling a story, and sometimes, as I indicate, it is a fiction or a science fiction. Sometimes I'm telling you what is really real. This part is really real. So I'm just explaining that to people who don't seem to be able to understand it. So difficulties, okay, difficulties. It sounds to me like autistic people, as far as this is concerned, have a lot of difficulties. Difficulties understanding what is not explicitly stated. Making inferences. Okay, I'm going to make an inference here. I'm going to assume that this criteria of diagnostic criteria for autism is geared and also describing an autistic person who is male. Difficulties understanding what is not explicitly stated, the non-literal or ambiguous meanings of language, idiom, humor, metaphor, multiple meaning that depend on the context for interpretation. Now, this is where my sister comes in. She says that I have too good of a sense of humor, understanding of metaphors, multiple meanings, and that I understand context and idioms. So therefore, I would not be considered autistic. The deficits result in functional limitations, ineffective communication, social participation, social relationships, academic achievement, or occupational performance, individually or in combination. Now, I'm going to stop reading the actual DSM-5 right now, because I'm going to tell you right now, I understand how the DSM-5 works. And it's not a trick, it's just that you have to understand how it works. So if a professional is using this as a diagnostic tool, there's going to be a lot more that goes into it. A person's going to have to meet one or more or several criteria to actually be diagnosed. It's complicated, and the DSM-5, the DSM-5 is a tool that is intended for physicians, specifically for psychiatrists. Now, I don't know why autism would be considered a psychiatric disorder, but apparently it is. And since none of you that I'm talking to are actually physicians, I think in order to further understand how this works, you would have to either be like a PhD psychologist or just a very educated, experienced psychologist. But you can't just read this. A layperson can't read this DSM-5 and understand it, because you have to be trained on how to even understand how to use the DSM-5. So I'm not sure why I know that. It could be the fact that I worked in healthcare almost all my adult life. So anyway, that's basically what I was going to cover. And that's all I have to say.